Good evening and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 74, and I'm going to begin a story called 12 Iron Sandals. Now, it's a fairy tale, and it's from the Czech Republic, that area of the world. These tales that I get to read multiple times because I have these wonderful books full of stories. These tales have incredible lessons within them, and it's partly why I share them. Also, when we hear a story, it's a wonderful thing to imagine that story in our mind. It's a powerful tool. It enlivens our creativity and our imagination, and it interconnects our brain in ways that nothing else does. Einstein would call storytelling the recipe to create a genius, because it's within our imaginative capabilities that anything becomes possible. So, whenever you hear my stories, I would suggest, so long as you're not driving or riding a bike or flying an airplane or driving a boat, that maybe you just take a time out and close your eyes and listen. Oh, and especially not when you're riding a motorcycle. Okay, 12 Iron Sandals. Once there was a king, very powerful, very wealthy, and he had 3 beautiful, intelligent daughters who had grown up listening to stories, all kinds of stories, from other lands, the history of the country where they lived, stories about their family, neighbors, all kinds of stories. Now, the 2 older daughters were wed. They had been married and were happily married. But the youngest, she was not. And in fact, she didn't really appreciate all the suitors coming to vie for her hand in marriage. She found it, well, quite a discouraging experience. These men trying to make themselves out to be often something that they weren't. Coming dressed in their finery, riding in their finely made and painted carriages drawn by magnificent horses. None impressed her. None caught her heart. Until one day, a man came from a very far and distant land that none had really heard of before. No one knew him, but the gifts that he brought, her father and her sisters, the princesses, and herself, far surpassed anything that had been brought before. But more importantly, he was genuine, honest. You could see in his eyes something very special. Now, the youngest princess felt a stirring in her heart like she had never felt before. She waited. She waited a week before agreeing to this marriage, which, when a suitor comes to ask a princess's hand in marriage, back in those days, a week was a long time. But she really wanted to be true to herself and her feelings and not do something quickly and rashly. Well, before the wedding, in fact, once she had agreed and said yes, the prince, well, the king, for he was a king, asked to be with the young princess alone. This was granted, and the two of them spent some moments together, in which he told her that he was under an enchantment. And though they could spend their days together, at night he had to be alone. And he asked her, "Do you think you can bear this burden? Because if you cannot, then free yourself now and do not marry me." Well, she said, "I will do anything for our love." Anything, she said, even if this enchantment lasts until our dying days, I will agree to marry you, because I have never felt anything like this before in my life. She was thinking through her heart. So, all was arranged, and in a short amount of time, the two were married. Now, as far as I know, it was a magnificent wedding. Magnificent. In fact, people are still talking about this wedding to this very day because it was so magnificent. Well, everybody complimented the princess on her fine husband, and everyone over the days that followed grew more and more fond of him. He stayed there at the castle of the king. Now, he did, in the conversation with the princess, let her know that he was a mighty king, far more powerful and wealthy than her father, and that once the enchantment was over, which it would be eventually, the two of them would be able to go there. Well, the princess was delighted with her husband, except in the evenings, in the nights. Though the days that they spent together were incredible, the nights were quite dreary. And her big bed, well, it was too big and too cold to contain the sorrow that she felt. The two of them would be doing something incredibly fun when the prince, the king, would get up and say, "I must go," and enter his bedchamber, and there lock himself in until the morning. They could be playing charades or, well, some game, or just be having some festive time, and up he would go and away. Now, the princess grew quite tired of this. And there was one night in particular when they were having an especially beautiful time. And she thought to herself, certainly he will never go. Not tonight. But as if he had been reading her mind, up he got and stood to go away. He asked her leave, but she had not, well, expected this, and off he went. That night she shed bitter tears. Some nights later, they were having a great time again. But suddenly the princess, she grew quiet, contemplative. She wouldn't say a word. No matter what the king did, whether he caressed her, spoke gentle, loving words to her, she would not respond. Finally, he got up, and she got up with him, and then began to lead him by the hand. He knew not where they were going, but was surprised when she entered the bedchamber of the king, or her husband. Now, it so happened that the night before, being so distraught with what had gone on, these continued separations, she had peeked through the keyhole, and she saw that her husband took a lizard skin off of a hook and put it on. And he became this giant lizard, and he would lay down in front of the hearth. And with a sigh, he fell asleep that night. She watched this through the keyhole. And when she led her husband into the bedchamber, she went straight to the hearth, took the lizard skin off of the hook, and threw it into the fire. Ah, that skin, it shriveled up, burst into flames, and was gone. And the king said to her, it is a pity that you have just done this. For in but 1 month more, my enchantment would have been over. And the evil sorcerer whose daughter I offended by not agreeing to take her hand in marriage will have full power over me. You will never see me again. The only way would be if you could wear out 12 iron sandals, break 12 iron staffs, and finish eating 12 iron loaves of bread. And with that, he vanished. Okay, tune in tomorrow, and I'll continue this story.